And I have the honor of introducing and sort of setting up really quickly the two groups of panelists that you're about to see. The conversation overall is the relationship between filmmakers and participants. And one of the things that the Documentary Accountability Working Group has really done a lot of work on is trying to understand the harm that comes to participants when the type of work that these two groups of filmmakers that are about to come up does not get done. And what you're going to find is that collaborative relationships between filmmakers and participants can really enhance and just result in extremely transformative, beautiful films. We saw that with American Coup last night. I have not had a chance to see Andy's film, Andy and Bubba's film, Wild Hogs and Saffron, but that's another example of deep collaboration between the filmmaker and the participant. You'll hear more once they come up, but I'm going to sit down and invite Colleen Thurston up, who will moderate the first group.
Thank you. Hey, ooh, I get to sit wherever I want. Cool. Great. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. We're going to talk with Andy Sarjahani, the director of Wild Hogs and Saffron, and Bubba, what is your last name? I'm sorry. I thought that, but I didn't want to say it out loud. Bubba Samuels, who was a participant at Wild Hogs and Saffron. So y'all come on up here. I just want to gauge, as y'all are taking a seat, how many of you all had the opportunity to see their film either the other day at the festival or you watched it, it's streaming? Okay, so a couple of folks. Where is it streaming, Andy?
Independent Lens.
Yep, so you can watch it through PBS. Would you mind giving kind of a brief intro to the film for folks who haven't seen it?
Yeah, sure. So this came about with wondering if we can like figure out, because when I'm looking at you, I'm looking like right into the, maybe we'll make it work.
Sir?
Yeah, that would, yeah, if you can, let's, yeah. Yeah, let's do this. We can, that way we can have, oh, that's for the next group. Okay, so, okay, this is better.
Okay.
So this film came about in January 2017. I had just returned from my first trip to Iran, and I was sharing photos from that trip on social media. And Bubba and I, we've known each other since 6th grade, and grew up together, graduated together, and we reconnected over those photos, and we ended up having a 3-hour phone conversation over just my time in Iran, my relationship with my family. And one of the common denominators that came away from that was that my family in Iran hunts wild boar, just like Bubba hunts wild boar. And I would say there's many other layers to it, but that was sort of like the beginning seed to this. And yeah.
Yeah, is there anything else, Bubba, you want to add to that, to those initial conversations, how that came about?
I hadn't talked to Andy in, it had been several years. And I was in West Virginia working pipeline. I was staying in a little apartment by myself, and I was just sitting there flipping through Facebook, and I seen those. And I messaged him. I was like, hey, man, I didn't know they did that over there. I want to talk about it. And he got with me, and we talked. Like you said, we talked for at least 3.5 hours. And it went from wild hogs to, cultural differences. I mean, stuff over there that I didn't have any idea about. And after that, we talked. I told him he needed to come down and hunt with me sometime. And we talked off and on there for a while, and then he called me with this. And I was like, yeah, I'm good with it.
Let's do it. So the film takes place over the course of afternoon, evening, of a hog hunt. And for those of you who aren't from this area, all throughout the South, I'm from Oklahoma. There's just a huge problem with feral pigs. They will ruin the land, and they reproduce very quickly. And so there's a lot of people in this area, like yourself, that do hunt them. And it's good for the environment, right? To hunt them as well as providing food and everything else. And so that we see that in the film, and you two talk a lot about those cultural differences and cultural similarities. And Andy, you're unpacking your cultural heritage and your identity as a mixed race Iranian American person that grew up in Arkansas, and coming to terms with, you know, some code switching that you had done in your past and your childhood, and how that affected your relationships with your peers. It's a beautiful film. Like I said, it's streaming on Independent Lens. Please check it out. And you all have gotten some like good press around this film since its release. There was a interview, Andy, that you did a couple of weeks ago, or maybe about a month ago now, in which you talk about how not just this film, but other films as well, you come out of it, and at the end, the participants within your film start using language like our film. And that is not an accident. I will also say, speaking of language, you'll hear us talk about participants. The term subject is not used as widely anymore in documentary because subject implies a passive person, right? So we can talk about the subject of the film being the subject matter, but a subject implies that they're not a collaborator and they don't really have agency. So I'm using that term participant, and that is in the title of this panel as well. So can you talk about like what is your approach to filmmaking that has led to that kind of collective community ownership for people like you, Bubba, to say this is our film, right, and rightfully so?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, it's most of the films that I've done up to this point, there's some level of connection that I have to the story. And so the people in the film, there's a relationship. And even if there hasn't been a relationship, there's something that they do or something that they've been a part of that there is a connection with. And that's sort of like the common ground that we find. And it's in a sense, it's like a mutual exploration, I guess, is maybe a way to look at it. I think, you know, with Bubba, it really meant a lot to me when you started referring to it as our film, because I've always felt that way. And I think that like, I really like that Bubba can come into these spaces and, someone who, you know, can come into a doc, you know, festival and take up space from my community, from my working class community, because that's very important to me. And I think, you know, like the feature I'm working on that Bubba will also be in with my dad is also a significant part of that. The title is Iranian Hillbilly, and my dad, you know, I was just there, I think 6 days ago, and did a little bit of filming with him. And he said, you know, he's like, today was a good day for our film. I think we accomplished a lot. And that's just sort of the approach that we've had, and just sort of the nature of the people and participants, that's been my relationship with them. And it, in many ways, I guess it does feel collaborative, but that's just sort of my connection to them, or the story at hand, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, Bubba, what are your thoughts about this and about it being both of your film, even though you know, you're both on screen, but you as the director, historically we kind of think of like the director as the one in control. But yeah, what was that process like for you to kind of come into that ownership and feel that way about the film?
Well, right off the bat, Andy said, like, when he first talked to me about it, he's like, I was like, well, what do I have to do? And he's like, just pretend the cameras aren't there, be yourself. Well, you lose all control when you say that to me. I'm going to, as you can tell from my language in the film, but Andy's always been somebody that I knew was a good dude. And I trusted Andy. I trusted him that he wouldn't, put me in anything to make me look bad or, and that was a big part of it is I trusted him. And anytime there was something that was said, he'd be like, he would call me and be like, hey, when they were editing, hey man, are you good with this part of it? And I'm like, yeah, do whatever you want to do on it. But I think when, like my mom started talking to me about, she'd call me and be like, you and Andy and your film I love it. And then I was kind of like, yeah, I helped with that. And that's kind of when it really, kind of took hold. It was ours, which brains, everybody needs a little bit of brawn behind their brains. And
Which one's which?
he's a brains for sure, and he's probably got me beat on the brawn too. But
I think it's very clear from the film that you all, you're having these like intellectual conversations, right? And so, I appreciate the self-deprecation for the humor, but we know how y'all both are. But I'm curious about that, that sharing process. Like at what point, Andy, you're sharing, are you sharing scenes? Are you sharing the whole film? At what point are you sharing a rough cut? And, as a filmmaker, are you saying in the back of your head, like, what am I gonna do if Bubba says, cut this or that or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I think trust was kind of a paramount situation, and we have, as you can see in the film, we have such an open communication that there's let's say hypothetically there was something that he said, hey, I'm uncomfortable with this, and I was like, oh my goodness, this felt like paramount to the story. We would just cross that bridge and figure it out. And if at the end of the day I understood that it was not like, I would never do anything in the film that would get him in trouble or embarrass him or his family. Like that's if there was something that sort of, I'm keeping that in mind the whole in the process of editing anyways. But if there's, like we joke about like, when he was like, man, I didn't realize I cussed that much, we joke around that, but it's like, that's who he is. And I don't think that's like, people love him for that. Like in the audiences, like everywhere, like if you haven't seen the film, like he's a very easy person he's magnetic because he's just a real person. And that's why I knew it would be a great collaboration to make the film with, because Bubba is like, you don't feel this, there's not an ounce of fraudulence there. And that's because he's comfortable in his own skin, and so for that vulnerability you see on screen, that's a person who has the courage to put themselves out there and say, yeah, this is who I am, and I'm not apologizing for it. I'm a work in progress. And so that made things a lot easier for me because he is so comfortable in his own skin. But if he says, hey man, I can't, like this is a no-go, then then we'll deal with that.
Yeah.
Make it work to where he does feel comfortable before it goes out.
Yeah. Y'all have both mentioned these aspects of trust. And I know that Documentary Accountability Working Group, and other proponents and people that are really working as advocates for the participants in the film, have talked a lot about trust being ongoing, access being ongoing. And I know when I went because I did go to film school, and I was kind of taught, like, you have to get that signed release form at the very beginning of production, and then, carte blanche. Like, they've signed their rights away, their story rights, and you can film them. Does it mean that that's right to film all the time? Not necessarily. So you're always trying to figure out what those ethical lines are. But it's that not taking for granted the access, not taking for granted the relationship that is being explored on screen, and maintaining that trust. And on those notes, I'm curious, Andy, how you have progressed as a filmmaker. And I think a lot of us in the doc space have been trained in a way that is from a more journalistic perspective. You don't share anything until it's done, right? You don't give the participant any kind of editorial feedback. And how have you developed your own approaches to things like that? How have you developed your own kind of ethical philosophy?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in a sense, it's just been the nature of the people in the communities and the stories that I've been working with. On this film, for example, I don't know at what point you saw a cut. It might have been fine cut Bubba, I think it was like before it was going to color. But it was sort of a process of like when we're filming, I would say like, is it cool if I roll on this, And if he's like, hey, whatever, which I don't even think he did because he's, again, there's just a certain sense of openness. And we would talk like after a day of like, hey, was there anything that happened today or that was as we were rolling, was there anything like you want me to be cognizant about in the edit room? We would sort of have conversations like that. And I think that, that's so I guess that sort of just comes up. I mean, like I'm filming with my dad now, it's a different story. I think it just honestly just comes down to like some level of respect for person and like the different variables that are in place for the particular project. I don't think there's necessarily a one size fits all. It just sort of comes down to what is the project, who are the participants, and what are the different variables in place.
And you were a participant. So did that process of putting yourself on screen, did that change how you think about anything? I mean, or, speak to that vulnerability that you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, it does give you an immense amount more compassion for the people that are in your films because, I remember the first time I saw, some level of, I pitched at South Pitch in New Orleans 2 years ago, and I remember seeing after that happened, and I just played like a 2-minute sizzle. I was just walking down the street later that day, and I sort of just like felt like I was like, man, I was butt naked in front of a bunch of strangers, and it's different territory. I'd much rather be behind the camera. So yeah, I would say that I've had, it is a process, especially as director, because you want to, like, it's important that I put myself out there too. If I'm asking him to do that, if I'm then the real me needs to be in there too,
Well, thank you both for being on screen. I think the relationship between you two and the complexities of both of you, if we're using film terms as characters, I mean, you're both fantastic characters to really explore humanity, to explore cross-cultural understanding and misunderstanding, really explore masculinity in how long is the director's cut?
It's 18 minutes and 45 seconds.
Yeah, in 18 minutes. There's just so much there. And I've been telling everyone, I'm like, please watch this film. Like everyone in America, everyone across the world needs to watch this film because the kind of conversations that you have on screen in those moments of vulnerability and just frank openness are models for how we all need to talk to each other. if I do say so myself, and I do because I have the microphone. But we have a few minutes left. I want to make sure that you all have a chance to talk about and anything that I haven't touched on, to talk about your experiences and Bubba, what's your next documentary you're going to make? No, but what anything else? Any thoughts that you want to share before we open it up to the audience as well?
I'd say, if anything, like, this is what Andy brought me into on this is something that I would have never in my life pursued or taken the time out of my day to go to a film festival. I would have never flown to Big Sky. I mean, it's something I would have never done without this. And it opened me up to conversations with people from all over the world, people that I would have never met, and throw yourself out there. It's amazing that, the stories you hear and the people you meet. If it wasn't for Andy, I'd have never met you. I'd have never met, a lot of great people. And yeah, just throw yourself out there, try something new. That's what it's all about, I guess.
Yeah, I think that, with this project, I would say that we became significantly better friends in the process. It added an immense amount more texture to our friendship. And that was like a really just unexpected surprise. And we've been able to have these shared experiences. Like, it meant a lot that he came to Big Sky. I also think too, if you're talking about situations with participants, most people, he took the time out of his life to come to Big Sky, the world premiere. It was important that he be there, but he also gave up 4 days of work. 4 days of work where, that he doesn't get back, to be there. And so that is something that I think we could be maybe a little bit more cognizant about in this space, because he came, gave of his time. People love him. They want to talk to him. He had a great experience, but he's also away from his wife, Sarah, and his 2 kids, Woodrow and Abby, for that time. So it was a great experience, but I just wanted to point out that's how invested he's been in the process, And I also just appreciate that one thing I would say is that, much of my upbringing, there's some level of like subconscious or some desire to kind of like, there's a need, as you see in the film, to like prove that I'm not a terrorist or that I'm not from this whatever stereotypes people have of Middle Easterners. And I would say now as an adult in the doc space, it's quite the opposite. I feel sort of an uphill battle with the stereotypes that are held about my rural background. And it's like we all stormed the Capitol on January 6th, and there's like a sense of the need to prove to people in the doc space that just because I talk the way I talk or dress the way I dress, or people from my community look the way they look or talk the way they talk, you can't put them in a box. And so that was why I was so proud of Bubba and so proud to like share this project with him, because he's like one huge middle finger to that concept.
Thank you, Andy.
I think our timer just started over again. We're at time.
That means that we are at time.
Okay.
I'm afraid.
I will just say again, thank you all so much. Bubba, when I saw you on screen, I felt the same way as Andy. I'm from Oklahoma, and I just feel like I'm constantly defending my people in one way or another. And like, for you to put yourself out there and represent yourself in such an authentic way, I think like I said, it's the dialogue that we all need. So thank you guys both for this film. Do we stay on stage?
You do not. We're going to bring Molly Murphy up next, but we can give a round of applause for this great part 1 of this session. Colleen Thurston, Andy Sarjahani and Bubba Samuels. I'm a fellow Kentuckian myself, so I know the struggle is real, as they say. Okay, next we are going to bring up Molly Murphy to moderate the next session. Molly Murphy is the Director of Partnerships and Innovation at Working Films, and Molly is going to invite up the panelists who will be speaking about American Coup, which premiered last night, world premiere right here in this cinema. All right, Molly.
Yeah, as she said, Molly Murphy. My pronouns are she, her. I am one of 5 co-directors of Working Film, the national nonprofit. It essentially brings together the worlds of social justice and documentary filmmaking. And we've been based in Wilmington, North Carolina for the last 25 years. I'm also a founding member of the Documentary Accountability Working Group, which is, I have to say, some of the most meaningful work probably the most meaningful work I've ever done in my career. And what we are is a network that catalyzes and cultivates a culture of care throughout the documentary ecosystem. And last, because of the theme of this festival, I'm part of Indie Media Arts South, and they'll be having a Works in Progress program after this, so I just hope you'll stick around. I'm incredibly fortunate to have had a small role in the making of this film and the plans for its release. In 2023, I co-designed and facilitated an accountability summit that brought together descendants of the coup, people who are in the film, people who were filmed but are not in the film, and stakeholders in Wilmington who have been working to address the long-term impact of the massacring coup that happened in 1898. And the intention was to lay a foundation of trust that could persist throughout the filmmaking process and in all the ways that the film will reverberate in the world. I'm really excited now, that I will say that was done in partnership with PBS North Carolina and couldn't have happened without that partnership, and a deep collaboration with Brad and Yoruba. I'm excited to invite them up, but before, I guess also the participants, Inez, Eason Campbell, you can come along. Lucy McCauley. Directors Yoruba Richen and Brad Lichtenstein. And executive producer at GBH and American Experience, Cameo George. The questions that we're going to cover today are going to be focused on what's different before and after this accountability summit taking place, and also how American Experience has navigated and considered the experience of participants. But before we do that, we're going to share a clip of the film.
The white supremacy campaign also had 2 militias at their disposal, the Wilmington Light Infantry and the Naval Reserves. They were supposed to report to the governor in Raleigh, who was a Republican, but in fact, the commanders of these 2 militias were leaders of the white supremacy campaign. In the summer of 1898, both militias, all white, were called up for federal service in the Spanish-American War. But the leaders of the white supremacy campaign made sure they were back in Wilmington before the midterm election.
There is a statewide regiment of Black soldiers that is also deployed. The white regiments are sent home, but the Black regiment is still held in reserve far from Wilmington. This leaves the Black community unprotected.
The city's merchants wanted to make sure they had enough firepower to overwhelm the majority Black population, so they brought a Colt rapid-fire gun, which was a new weapon then. It was basically one of the first machine guns. The merchants also bought something called the Hotchkiss gun and provided it to the Naval Reserves, and they mounted that as well on a wagon.
So they're preparing for war. That's what this period is, preparation for war.
I am Ann Keenan, and William R. Keenan was my great-grandfather's uncle. He was a captain of the Wilmington Light Infantry. He had lost his position as customs collector in Wilmington to John Dancy. He was put in charge of one of the Colt rapid-fire machine guns.
They take a couple of members of the Black leadership out on this boat just to show them what this gun can do.
Before Election Day, business leaders rounded up several of Wilmington's leading Black citizens and brought them on a tugboat next to Eagles Island, where Captain Keenan and his fellow light infantry soldiers demonstrated the power of the Colt gun by lacing the opposite riverbank with 500 rounds of gunfire, ripping through the brush and gouging out holes in the soft earth.
White people are already beginning to patrol places where African Americans are going to be voting on Election Day. They are visiting these areas with guns in their hands. The hope is that African American men will stay home, that African American men will not even attempt to exercise their constitutional right to vote.
What was happening among white employers, if they found out a Black employee had registered to vote, they were being fired.
Many began to say, well, perhaps we should stay home. Perhaps if we stay home, we can avoid conflict. When African American women began to learn that Black men are even considering not participating in the election, they are outraged. They see this as a problem because African American men are the representatives for Black families.
Resolved that every Negro who refuses to register his name next Saturday that he may vote, we shall make it our business to deal with him in a way that will not be pleasant. He shall be branded a white-livered coward who will sell his liberty and the liberty of our whole race to the demons who are even now seeking to take away the most sacred rights vouchsafed to any people. Resolve further that we have these resolutions published in our daily record, the one medium that has stood up for our rights when others have forsaken us. Respectfully submitted, an organization of colored ladies.
In this copy of the record from October 20, 1898, you have Alex Manley speaking to the Black community in a very direct way about what's happening in the city.
He published a piece that said, look, I know they're talking violence. We're seeing all the guns around. We're seeing all of the patrols.
Got the clip. Thank you. But in case you weren't there last night. So we're going to begin with Inez and Lucy, who are descendants of the massacre, both victims and perpetrators, and who participated in the Accountability Summit. And the question is the same for you both, and Inez, we can begin with you, which is both of you have been featured in films focused on the 1898 coup in Wilmington. I'd like to know what was different about this experience. What led you to want to take part and continue to take part? And what were some of the challenges and experiences and some of the positive things and experiences of fulfillment that you had?
I would say the difference between this experience and experiences in the past, I always had the, little trepidation as far as, I always wanted to make sure that the story was continuously told. So I've never once, not volunteered to be interviewed because, my mantra was always to tell the story, get as many people to understand what happened as possible. The thing was that oftentimes, much of the interview that I would have would be left on the editing floor. So I may, they may have spent days with me or months with me, and and then it would be reduced to like 5 seconds or 3 seconds or 10 seconds. And so they would focus more on the historical aspects and professional ideologies. And so the descendants' voice was often left off the table. So with this crew, this team, they made it a point to, we all met one day at Jingo's, which is a local playhouse. And so they asked us what was our fear, what fears that we have as descendants in participating in this documentary. And so the consensus was we just did not want to be left out of the process as descendants. And oftentimes, that's what would happen. We would hear, people who had never spent time in Wilmington, speaking about reparations and how they felt that should impact us. And, but they had, they've never walked a day in our stagnated shoes in that city. So it would be really insulting a lot of times. So with this group, they just made it a point to always keep us informed. They were always emailing us, texting us, calling us, and it didn't matter what time of night or time of day. But I really appreciated it because we all became a tech family basically. We communicated often Zoom, but we felt very informed in the entire process, and just the fact that they asked us, what was the fear, and so as descendants, we just said we just don't want to be left out of the process as descendants. So I feel like the film itself had an even thread, and I know the editing process is often the most severe, part of, any film. But I thought they did a really excellent job in actually portraying it. Each family, it was like a spokesperson from each family that delivered the message. I feel, equilaterally, with everyone and that was a participant. So that was the main thing, is that they kept us involved. We never felt outside the loop the entire process, and which meant a lot to me from my past experiences.
Thanks, Inez. And Lucy, I'd love to hear, your experience with this filmmaking process and anything that was challenging, and what you've walked away with that you feel really good about.
It was touched on it, but I'll try to keep it short. So I'll start with the end result, which, just to reflect what Inez just said, really turned out so great. I mean, so much better than I had expected. And we, as descendants, we had started becoming a family together. And I felt so honored that, descendants like Inez and Elaine and the, Manley descendants started thinking of me as, one of them, like we're all in it together to tell this story. And that, so we were becoming like family. And then the filmmakers kind of helped us continue that and make it even stronger, really, because they brought us together many more times than we would have come together. And so that was a beautiful thing. And, we had capers, right? Yeah, we had fun. In some of it, filming in my family cemetery, that was hilarious.
Cake stuff.
It was, Anyway, so, good feelings. Back to the beginning of the process, though, I came in very wary I wasn't going to do it. I had just really had a bad experience with a high-level production team who I really trusted and had spent time with them and with a dear friend of mine who's since passed away, but who's a historian in Wilmington, Cynthia Brown. And we were telling our story together. And then she was interviewed separately. I was interviewed separately. That was all there. The end result, which we got to see along with everybody else in Wilmington, was not good for us. Okay, and the piece. I mean, there was a fair amount of Cynthia in there, which I was so grateful for. There was one 2-second clip of me talking, and it was something that was taken completely out of context, and it was in conversation with Cynthia, but you didn't hear the other side. You didn't hear what was happening, and it was really, I was floored, and I was really ashamed. I just felt like this, wow, that did not come out right. I just had wished so much that they had just not put me in at all. That was just, it felt gratuitous. So the first thing I asked your reviewer and Brad was, I will do this on the condition that there is at some point in the process, I get to see what you're going to put up there. And they both assured me that is their process. That is what they always have done, is the main actors in the film, they show it to them. And it's not that we have veto power or anything like that. I understood that. But I just wanted to see that things were in context. So that's why I signed on. And then as we started going, there were a few bumpy things right at the beginning, where there was some miscommunication and, in one particular event where the descendants of victims they were not told that some other descendants besides me, who they knew very well, of perpetrators, were going to be in a situation with them. And that was, that really caused a lot of pain and hardship that was unnecessary. And so what happened later, I think the turning point really came when Molly's group had everybody come together and talk about that incident and some other things. And I think the relationship really changed after that. And I felt like there was more listening and more not pushing when we said, no. And so, we're all in it to tell a story, and we wanted to tell it the best way, that we could to get this out there into the world. Anyway, that was the turning point. And then, in the end, sadly, it was not the case that we got to see any footage. And that, I think, is a real problem. And the good thing I can say is that Brad and Yoruba Zoomed with each one of us and told us this. They just told us, our hands are tied. The network that's doing this, the program that's doing this, will not allow that to happen. And I felt like the rug was pulled out. And I think a lot of other people did too, from what I understand. And that was discouraging. It was really discouraging. So I was, I had no idea what I was going to see last night, and I just had to trust, and fortunately it turned out great. So.
Thank you. So Brad and Yoruba, I have kind of the flip side. You both have so many credits to your name and accolades. And I'd like to know what was different in this filmmaking process with your relationship with the participants and the other folks that you filmed with or who were community stakeholders.
Yeah, I'll start. We were just listening to the previous conversation and thinking about the different kinds of films I've worked on obviously this, and how each story is obviously unique and different, and approaches who you are, where the platforms, styles, all different, right? And for this, I think for us, we knew the importance of working with the descendants on this and telling this story. And, Lucy outlined some of the initial challenges that we had due to, many different things. Folks know how our production can be and how we get overwhelmed and sometimes you don't cross all our T's and dot all our I's. But that, at that point, we had to stop and say, okay, we know that there's issues here. We need to do, and I don't know if we went, and I'm forgetting exactly how the ABCs of how it led up to the account of the summit, but it was clear that we needed to have some kind of process that was better, and also too the importance of just hanging out with each other and like getting food and drinks and getting to know each other as humans, which is so important for every process. And I guess, I'm also thinking of the only other time I've had where I couldn't show a cut of a film was when I did a film about Breonna Taylor for the New York Times Presents, and that's also their policy, and Frontline as well. Yes, that's right. But okay, so it's been a couple times, but the importance of it's in some ways asking the participants, to trust us, to try to build that trust, we show them, offer for them to watch other work that we've done so they see what kind of filmmakers we are. And yeah, it's kind of a gamble. I can't say that it isn't, but we are so pleased that they, continued this journey with us and did trust us. And, the best that we could do was sit down with them and tell them, walk them through. And I remember I had to do that with Breonna's mother as well, they were also very nervous about appearing in the film. And so working, I hope to be able to do this more in my work. And I thank Working Films for making a beautiful process for us to be able to do this. So.
I'll just briefly add a couple things. I don't think it's always appropriate to have this kind of collaborative relationship. For instance, I'm working on an investigative doc right now, and it would not cross my mind to share the footage. Well, it crosses my mind, but it just did. But I would not want to, and I'm not asking for collaboration with some of the people in that film. But in this case, it very much fits with this model that Yoruba and I have both worked in very often. And, and it was awkward to have made that promise, which we usually do, which is show a late stage rough cut. And as Lucy said, no veto power, but to get feedback and have that conversation. But I also totally respect the rules that are there for a reason too, with different broadcast networks. So, you do your best to just have a relationship and have that conversation in relationship. I was going to say one thing, and I'll pass it back, but Molly and Anna at Working Films also had a concern that, even though Yoruba and I have done a few films, neither of us live in North Carolina. So that was one of the reasons too that Molly and Anna felt like it would be really good for us to engage in a process like this.
And I also just want to say quickly that we weren't even, when we did the accountability summit, American Experience wasn't even on board. So we also did not know those rules. I just had to say, yes, we're hoping, but.
Yeah, I would love, exactly. I'd love to jump in at this point because I know that, it's interesting that we're having this conversation in this kind of forum because these are really the kind of sticky things that you encounter when you're a filmmaker. This is a very real conversation. And as Brad and Yoruba just said, when they began working on this film with Rachel and the team at PBS North Carolina and started filming with you all, started meeting with you all, I think Rachel and I had maybe had one conversation at that point, but this film was not definitely coming to American Experience and PBS. So that was a whole separate long process of figuring out, is this film appropriate for our series, which has all sorts of, different rules and formats and things. And so once we figured out like this is a good fit for us editorially, and it was a film that we wanted to partner on and be a part of, like we're not an acquisition series, like we don't come in when the film is finished, like we come in so that we can like be in the edit and have these kind of conversations. But you know, we had to have a conversation where they were like, we said that we would do this because typically as independent producers, this is something that we're comfortable with. And it's kind of like Colleen said this in the last session that, you know, I come from journalism. You talked about Frontline and the New York Times and how that's standard for them. So that's my practice as well, because it's like I was a journalist before I was a filmmaker. And so that's because we are the series of historical record, we treat our films as journalism as well. And so we had to navigate, because I was like, if I make an exception in this case, then it's off the table forever for me with this series. And I can't have one set of rules for you and a different set of rules for someone else. And so I had to then, as the representative of the series, have conversations with them about the relationships that they had developed on the ground in Wilmington, and me having faith in them, knowing the kind of producers and filmmakers that they are. Like, I was like, you can get past this, like, you know, because I know what your intentions are and I understand how you're communicating with the participants. And I just think that we're all coming from such a good place. And, you know, obviously I had the benefit of seeing early cuts already, so I knew that we weren't going to do something that would make you feel uncomfortable. But we also had to grapple with the fact that you were going to see it live with people, right? And so it's just this very delicate dance that we all went through. But it's like, these are the things that you really do have to grapple with.
And I just want to say one quick thing too. One of the things that we knew that we could do, right, no matter where it was broadcast, is that we could bring the descendants into conversations when the film, you know, at festivals, at screenings, around education, around impact, and that was a place that we could, you know, have the descendants really in that process. And so we were very excited about that, and again, grateful that they, you know, were enthusiastic and are enthusiastic too.
Yeah, thank you. And I will say, you know, I've been in the field of documentary impact now 23 years and have led strategy summits to develop them over the course of that entire time. And it is very new to have participants featured in films to take part in the planning of the impact campaign. And that was something unique that I think is, you know, when we think about accountability from the point of reflection and your motivations and intentions to making the film, it actually should extend all the way into how the film will go out into the world, because that's really where, you know, the impact is going to occur for those who live this story and will always live this story and will walk away to their next project with their life. We aren't going to have time for questions because we have this timer in front of us, and I don't want to shortcut anyone or not have enough. But I encourage you to talk with all of us about the process. Natalie Bullock-Brown, who opened for us and spoke this morning, is also here with the Documentary Accountability Working Group. Andy's film team, please talk with us about it. And I just want to encourage any closing words from you all in the time that we have left.
Yes, I just want to say that our film premieres on American Experience November 12th. So please spread the word, check it out. And there's a website also that if you Google American Experience and Wilmington Coup, which I've been doing, it'll come up.
I was just going to add a couple of things that didn't quite come up, but for instance, another rule is that we never pay participants to participate in a film. However, we were able to address some of what Andy was bringing up. So if we were bringing people together, we could offer travel stipends, we could help with things like that. So that was another way to try to mitigate the, you know, the burden of being in a film. And then another whole category of things that came up at the Accountability Summit had nothing to do with the content. It was more like just more transparency, because people don't know how the money works. You know, they hear a number like $1.3 or $4 million, and it sounds like Yoruba and I are
living site.
Gonna be on vacation forever. But it turns out that money goes to something. So we also had some transparency around budgeting and fundraising and how the system works and so forth, which I think, was really helpful.
And I'll just really quickly say again, I know that all filmmakers feel this way, and we've heard it throughout the summit. We couldn't do what we do without you participating, without you being vulnerable in lots of ways, without you having that trust. And I think that, the best thing for me last night was knowing that you saw what the end result was and felt proud to participate. It sounds like a platitude, but that is really meaningful. To me, running the series, to them as the filmmakers, to me as a viewer, not as an industry person, that is the thing that keeps all of us up at night, wanting to know that you're comfortable, that you're happy, that you feel like it was worth the effort. So I just think that always needs to be said, for sure.
And yeah, I'm so thrilled it's going to be on American Experience. And, I wish it were also on, I don't know, somewhere where more people would see it. A lot of people would see it. I'm sure they will. A lot. And it'll be streaming after, too.
Yes,
yeah.
well, it will.
So that's good. Because it just the story has to get out there. And that, I think we're all incredibly grateful for that. I still, I did have a really bad experience with a really high-level film team. And so it does happen. It wasn't them. You guys, I didn't know what you were, but but now I do. Yeah, so that was the experience. Oh, just quickly, it's also not just films; it's news crews. I remember talking to you, and you were like, "News crews have come in."
Yeah, and that's basically who they were. It was like news teams. It was mainly news teams that previously they were like online news teams. Sometimes local news teams, and different people would just contact, different newspapers who are featuring articles, and sometimes over the phone, interviews for a podcast. So there was a variety of mediums that spoke with me, about the Coup, and specifically a lot came about after the January 6th issue and the parallel between what happened in Wilmington and what happened in Washington. And I was just really enamored about everything that I, reviewed last night. And I really didn't, for some reason, I just didn't think about it being a 2-hour feature. And so last night I was asleep and then I shot up and I was like, holy shit, oh my God, this is gonna be major. So I was like, it was so funny because I was dead sleep and I was shut up, oh my God. And I had to text my son
Well, thank you all. I feel so fortunate to have been in this process with you and to be carrying on the work of it going into the world with you all. So.